Are you looking to grow revenues, increase profitability, or obtain financing? If so, you came to the right place.
Running a business is all about leadership. How do you become a better leader? Learn from the successful entrepreneurs and business owners how to lead your organization more effectively. That's why we created Leadership Live at 8:05, Talking Small Business, to help you succeed with your host, Andrew Frazier, Business Growth Pro and CFO and founder of the Small Business Pro University. Every Tuesday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern, we're joined by experienced entrepreneurs and business owners who share their secrets to success via live stream. Also, every Friday morning, we release a new podcast episode. Either way, you will learn about developing your business leadership skills from our roster of highly performing guest experts. Leadership Live is one of the many valuable resources provided through the Small Business Pro University, empowering business owners to learn, profit, and grow. Find out more at sbpro.u.com.
Good evening and welcome to Leadership Live at 8:05, Talking Small Business. I'm your host, Andrew Frazier, and we're here once again to really talk about key things that can help you be more successful with your business. At the end of the day, your business can only go as far as you're prepared to take it. So the key is to prepare yourself, becoming a better leader, and that's what this show is all about, helping you to learn how to lead better. A big piece of being able to lead better is continually learning and building your knowledge base. So that's why each week we have a tremendous guest that we really talk to and gain insights from their business expertise. So very excited about this week's guest and this week's topic. Today we're going to talk to Brad Eisenhuth, and really talking about the secret to creating sustainable change. And, in business, change is extremely difficult. Most change management projects for large businesses are unsuccessful. So it's not something that's a given that you're going to be able to change one situation to another. So it's important to, understand what it takes. Brian has done this for many organizations, large and small, and can share some great insights and best practices. So let's say hello to Brian. Brad, how you doing, Brad? Welcome.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm really well. You've caught me in the middle of the day here in Australia. So over your end of the world, people are having hopefully dinner and getting ready for a good chance to jump into entrepreneurship. So thanks for the chance to speak to your audience.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, definitely. Excited about really having a chance to chat with you. Tonight's session, it's amazing how fast this year has gone. I'm looking up and, you're in the mad dash to the end of the year to get your results, to make it a great year. So this is very timely in what we're talking about. So before we dig into the questions, it would be great for everybody to know a little bit more about you. So if you could take a couple minutes, really talk through your journey, some of the key milestones and some of the key things that you learned around the way, that would be great.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm happy to. I sometimes question what parts of the story are important, but I might go back to laying a bit of the platform of who I am and where I come from. And I know for a lot of you from the US, you'll have experience with the NFL. Earlier in my life, I had ambitions to be a rugby league player in Australia, and really enjoyed trying to pursue that. I had a contract at a very early stage of my life, and during the high school years when I was studying pre-university, worked hard on that as well as my education. Really wanted to sort of create a good platform for my future, and this idea of becoming a rugby league player was interesting to me. And at the time, if you guys, we don't wear helmets. We kind of have a very different model of playing that type of football. But I was a fairly small, and I still am a fairly small player relative to everyone else, 5'7", quite light. And it just meant that I probably wasn't the typical person to succeed in that environment. But what I really worked on, and one of the things that I set as a way of thinking at that stage of my life in my teenage years, was how to succeed and how to make things happen in spite of some of the challenges that you might be up against, or the constraints you might be up against. So what was really good, I managed to get into a what we'd call the Premier League, or the reserve grade level of my football career, and unfortunately had injuries and had a few things that went against me. And I started to reevaluate what was important to me, and I went on a bit of a process of exploration. So that led to I had a scholarship at the same time for a university, went to into the engineering field. I certainly immersed myself in that and wanted to challenge myself further by exploring different avenues and starting to learn more about the world of business and the world of people. And these two things go hand in hand, in my opinion. So I spent time working with individuals who are in a career environment where they were unemployed for a long period of time, and started to understand the psychology of what prevented people moving through and creating change in their life at the point of transitioning between jobs. I went into the space of recruitment for a period of time, and ended up going into quite senior positions and doing executive level recruitment over a period of years, and managed to build a really strong network here in Australia, working with many of Australia's leading organisations in terms of talent identification and building out critical hires. And I was always motivated to understand why things work and how they work. And it kind of comes from that idea of football. What makes you successful in your environment? I always ask myself that question. And where it led me to was a point where I'd fallen out of love of working for someone else. I'd also fallen out of love of some of the kind of traditional career paths. And I decided to move into it and create a startup with a business partner and build out a team. And ultimately that startup, I won't go into a great level of detail, but while we launched it, we had investors, we had a support system. I started to build out a team and made some great traction. It was around solving the problem of access to mentorship, around career development, and around development of teams and their success in their career. While we had onboarded quite a few successful customers, we had quite a few breakdowns inside of the business, and one was my business partner leaving the company, and other factors that influenced us, and it just couldn't work. No matter what I looked at in terms of avenues to solve funding or solve for the growth, while we had a great platform or great starting point, we were never going to get it to work. And what that was a great turning point for me, where I shifted the business to become a consulting practice, and decided to build a really successful consulting practice. Why? Because it was a high margin business. It allowed me to recover from some of the cash burn and some of the pressures that a failed startup creates. And I also promised my investors that I'd find a way, while I didn't need to, and while I could have probably stepped away and started the business separately, I really tried to do the best by offering to come back with some sort of financial reimbursement. It was just something that I really stood behind, and I thought it was the right thing to do at the time. So while a little bit silly in that I could have easily walked away, it was just part of my DNA and the way I think. So that building of the consulting business was really about talking to these contacts and these clients I had around these consistent problems around embedding change of performance. I was dealing with that in my own life. I was dealing with that with the business of what we created. I looked at it from the point of view of the individual and their career and the performance that drove career success. And I started asking better questions around that, because what I was hearing when I was talking to people all the time was that change was not being affected very well. And when we had visions for what we'd like people to perform like, or what we want teams to function like, or what we want the business to achieve, there's all these inabilities to succeed, because most people were looking at it in a very linear way. If I do this, then I should get that. And we know that's not the way the world works. We know that's not the way change works, but yet that's the way we were approaching a lot of the projects that a lot of change projects were being approached, and they were often failing. And so many of you would see some data that 70 to 80% of change projects fail, and they often fail not because of the fact that there's not good intentions or that the strategy itself has huge deficit. It's that there's often a lack of thinking of how we actually solve problems effectively and take people through the process of solving those problems such that they embrace them and they're able to successfully adopt that new vision that we have. And there's a bunch of complexities that sit inside of that. So we started out by simply working on some projects with some pretty successful organizations. The first two projects we had were with Subaru and PepsiCo, and they just came out as a result of asking smart questions and my ability to bring together consulting professionals and experts to get around that problem and work around what it would look like to make a change. So this consulting business started at very, sort of green shoot level, simply going out there, asking the question, working on real problems, putting the right sort of structures around me and people around me to do that. Fast forward a few years, pandemics occurred, all these sorts of things, but we have received many awards in the space of being successful for effectively developing solutions in large corporate environments. We were asked, after building the team and doing some good things, to work with one of Australia's bodies for accounting and finance, the Chartered Accountants of Australia and New Zealand, to build a business advisory service development program for accountants who wanted to go into providing business advice to small businesses. And I said to them at the time, hey, I'm a small business, yes, and I've grown my business, and that's great, but I work with corporates. I've worked with corporates around the process of driving change. I've worked with all of these other structures. So, why are you asking me to do it? And why is my business the right fit? And of course, we decided to take on the challenge. They felt that we had a really good reputation in our market, and we became experts at that period of time in the small business space. We really wanted to double down. So if we're going to take on this project, we've really got to understand, we've really got to be effective. So fast forward a few years, we've developed that. We've worked through and helped accounting practices build out their business advisory service for small businesses. And now what has happened for me personally and for my team is we've fallen in love with the small business space. So we're really rapidly doing work similar to you, Andrew, in the space that you operate in, but doing that primarily for businesses in Australia and New Zealand at this moment, supporting the transformation of their business, helping entrepreneurs really get what they want out of their business, helping them design the way that they can change their business such that it actually really serves their needs and it is actually sustainable. So it takes on a lot of the principles that we apply in larger structures and it brings it down into a much more practical level for small businesses. And we're having a lot of fun doing it, right? So that's where we are now, Andrew, and been a hell of a journey.
Yeah, no, it definitely sounds like a great journey. There's a lot of things that I want to dig into and learn more about, and learn what you learned going through some of these things, because definitely everybody has a business journey, and one of the reasons why you talk to and listen to people who had the journey before is you can miss some of the pitfalls, what to look out for, so that your journey can be even easier and faster. So that's really what we're trying to do today. So we're going to start talking about some questions, but before we do that, I want to just share a couple short videos. Next week, we've got 2 events coming up. Every couple times a year, I do a power breakfast for entrepreneurs and business owners. That's going to be next Friday. And next Thursday night, we're going to have a networking event. So the pre-event networking. So if you haven't been, definitely something you want to check out. We've been doing this for more than 10 years and had a lot of success helping people really develop relationships so they could sell more and also get financing. So very excited about those. So what I'm going to do is play the videos, and then I'll come back and be talking small business with Brad. So here we go. Let's check it out.
Are you an entrepreneur or business owner? If so, you need to check out the Power Breakfast. The Power Breakfast is New Jersey's premier business networking event for entrepreneurs. Power Breakfast is a unique forum for learning best practices, enjoying great networking, and gaining useful knowledge. Over the past 10 years, we have hosted more than 1,500 attendees who have directly benefited with revenue growth and financing. Join me at the next Power Breakfast event on October 27th at the Glen Ridge Country Club. The featured guest speaker is Terry Travick, who will be talking about creating the ultimate business strategy.
At one point in my life, I was the global president for a financial services company. And in 3 years, we improved our profits by over $80 million. And then as a consultant, there's an example of a company I helped in Texas that was about an $8 million company 10 years ago. And organically, I've shown them and helped lead them to grow from an $8 million company to over $200 million today.
I look forward to seeing you at the Power Breakfast on October 27th. Your business can only go as far as you're prepared to lead it. You need access to expert advice, important connections, and valuable resources to achieve your goals. What can we do to help? I created the Small Business Pro Network to help you to grow your business smarter, faster, and easier by meeting you where you are along your journey from startup to scaling. We will.
Okay, great. Played the wrong video for the second one, so we'll come back. But let's get started. So, Brad, you talked about your journeys, so many things that I want to dig into. But one of the first things is, I don't know if you've heard this, but many times people say that, your most successful business is your third business. And I noticed that you have had a journey on different businesses. And, what were some of the key things that you learned early on that brought you to the business that you have now?
It's a great question, and you're right. I guess the third iteration of our business has probably been the most successful phase for us in terms of the development of where I want to take it. And that's a really good observation. In that, the big thing that I've learned is you really need to put the right people around you, and it's so important to ensure that people are connected to a vision that you have that is not about their personal needs, and not also about your own personal needs per se, but about an objective that makes sense for where you want to take the business. And if people aren't rowing in the same direction, it will become very dangerous and very, very quickly erode a lot of value, and obviously cost you a lot of pain in the process. And I went through that very early, and I'm actually really blessed. I'm glad I went through that process. It forced me to really start to look at myself and say, am I putting the right people around me? Have I got a direction and a focus that's actually something that I'm bought into, but equally others will buy into or can buy into? And without that, you're really rudderless. You're unable to affect the change that you want to affect within your own business, because the process of bringing people to alignment takes too long. And so I went through that process and learned a lot. And as far as putting the right people around me, I've always realized the value of mentorship and coaching and advisory. And so while I had that in my career as an employee and a leader in a business before, I really needed to look back at myself and say, right, while I'm able to, affect change for others and support businesses from a consulting perspective, I need to develop myself continuously as well. I need to make sure that I'm growing and developing and becoming the best leader I can of this business. So, a part of my ecosystem was making sure that I had a fantastic advisor coach with me, making sure that I spent a lot of time reflecting on what it looked like to build a great business, what it looked like to get rid of some of the blind spots that I might have had, or the biases that were getting in the way of my success. And some of those biases, they're not always the worst thing in the world, right? But they can catch you out. So, for example, I'm a very driven person. I'm very outcome orientated. I'm very focused on getting results. It's something that I've always been able to do in different pursuits where I've been I've had that either the right team around me, or I've had a sense of individualism in it, and it's been very easy to do. But that doesn't actually serve you all of the time when you're trying to take others on a journey, and when you need to build a team. First, if you skip that process and you go for outcomes and results and drive too hard, the foundations are not strong enough, and things start to break. So I've learned that lesson, and I've seen that with the clients I've worked with. But I've still, because of my own biases, have to catch myself and make sure that I'm really sensible about what foundations I need to build, so that I can start setting up for the results I want. So there were a few big learnings. I've had lots, to be fair. So we could go into lots of rabbit holes today, Andrew, but they're just a few big ones for me.
Okay. And I think, the foundation is key. If you're going to grow, and actually last week, my guest was Terry Travick, who's going to be speaking at the Power Breakfast. And, we talked about strategies for growing revenue. But before you can do that successfully, you have to build the infrastructure you need to have to support that. Because a lot of times businesses go out of business because they grew too fast, just as easily as if you didn't sell enough. So that's key. So now you talked about, you had the client of the accounting group, and basically they paid you to become experts at what you do. So that was a pretty sweet deal. So how did you secure that? And really, how did you take advantage and maximize that experience?
Yeah, good question. So look, at the time, I think one of the most important things you can do is build a good reputation based on what you do. Being known for doing excellent work, being known for being a trusted player in your marketplace. And one of the key areas that we played in was working with finance teams and helping them transform. So, the members of that particular body had experience with feedback about our business, that we were dedicated, focused, wanting to see the success of the marketplace we operated in and these particular clients that we'd experienced. And secondly, we had great results. So we were really focused on solving the right problems. And when you look at the result you get from solving the right problems, they're far, far more successful than if you simply put a Band-Aid on it. And at the time, what was happening in the accounting space was business advisory was being described as a process of installing tools, or installing forecasting systems, or cash flow forecast tools, or providing people information that, yes, very valuable, but it fundamentally isn't business advice. It's a reporting system or a tool. And so the accounting environment had been brainwashed into believing that was business advisory. And so when we started to look at it, we were starting to brief on this, and I brought in good people around me to be part of it, who had already successfully built business advisory practices in their own right, who are not accountants. We started to look at it and say, right, well, we've got to really be clear on what the definition of business advisory is. And realistically, it is working with a business towards its objectives, right? And the objectives are defined by its shareholders. And in most cases, when we're looking at small to medium-sized businesses, that's defined by the business owner. What is it that they want from their business asset? What does it need to give them to provide them either the lifestyle or the freedoms or the outcomes that they are wanting, the purpose that they turn up to and wake up for every morning of the day. And the advice needs to be shaped and relevant to pursuing that outcome in a smart and consistent manner. So that development of that framework to provide advice is so important. Now, if we're relying on having a look at only financial data, and we don't take into account the conditions of the organization, the effectiveness of leadership, the effectiveness of the sales system, the pieces that connect together to drive value, then we're looking at one-dimensionally. And so what we became experts at was looking at and understanding how a business strategy then degenerates into a practical process of deliberate progress. towards a goal, right? So how do you help your business change towards a goal, or at least maintain its success in a changing environment? Because as we all appreciate, the world around us changed. So we have this mantra that, you know, change is inevitable, progress is an option. And if you take that into account when you look at providing advice, the decision is, how do we deliberately progress in spite of the world changing or the changes that happen to us? Let's see them as happening for us, and then let's deliberately progress. So that all came about as a result of really understanding it, being effective at defining what it looks like and building something that actually solves the problem. Now, of course, years on, we've worked with, in that particular part of our business, probably 100 accounting practices, and you know, some are never going to want to provide that sort of advice. The best thing they can do for their own business is stay in tax and compliance and fundamentally be excellent at it, because it serves their business goals and their needs. Whereas, you know, many others, a bit like yourself, Andrew, who are motivated for different things in their life or different returns on investment from their business, you know, they're great at adopting that sort of practice. So, you know, that's a little bit of the context. And I guess maybe what the group was looking at was a bit of a challenger, probably someone that was not going to just say yes, but design something that actually works.
Okay, no, that's excellent. So you talked about a couple key things. You know, number one, you know, tools are great, but, you know, a lot of times, you know, people have to change to use the tools. So as a result, many times tools are not used. So, and like you know, the other thing that you talked about is, you know, figuring out the problem. And, you know, you, like myself, have probably realized that generally what they think the problem is isn't really the real problem or the root cause of what's going on. So, you know, so that's important, figuring out what the problem is. And what types of things, or what types of ways do you work with clients to figure out what the real problem is?
It's a great question. And you're so right. The problem is that's described you. And many of your listeners, you might be looking at your business saying, I've got all these things that aren't working as well as I'd like. Often they're symptoms of what's causing those, of the real problem, right? There's a causation, and there's this relationship between how we work, how we lead our business, how we make decisions, how we've designed the infrastructure, and the outcomes that we're getting. And so what we do and what we teach and what we design into a process of change is being very deliberate about thoroughly understanding the context and really looking at the relationship between the outcomes a business owner wants, how they're leading and shaping the decisions in the business, what business systems or frameworks, how does that business even work, and ultimately what value does it derive to its customers, and what value does it derive to its people. So there's a few moving parts here. Right now, when you start looking at that contextually and you anchor everything right back towards that outcome is unique to that organization because the person is unique and they want certain things from their business, then we can only then, when we understand that context and that outcome, can we decide and define what to do. So we need to spend time understanding ourselves, right? As business owners, we need to look at stepping away from our day to day and go, well, where do I make great decisions, and where am I not making great decisions, and how do they serve what I really want in my business? Not what I need. The things that you need depend on what you want. You know, I work with a lot of business owners, and they'll tell me that they'll come in and say, okay, I want to fix this issue of growing sales. I want to grow more sales. Where are my sales? Okay, great, fantastic. Tell me more about what you're doing this for. And they sort of struggle with it, or they'll talk about a few high level things. Right, let's work at that. Paint the picture for me. What does it need to do for you? What does this business need to be for you? And they'll often say things like, well, I went into business to spend more time with my kids, or I went into the business to spend time, generating more financial returns so I can go and travel, and it takes a while to pull that all apart. But once we start looking at that, only then can you go, well, is this revenue issue, is this top line issue the problem, or is it actually about designing the business to serve that outcome you want. Now that idea of flexibility, or it might be different. Some people really want to make a dent in the world. We're just working with a client this morning, actually, wanting to make a really massive impact around climate change and the behaviors in society around that. And that's a passion project. It's not financial. It's driven by his belief system and a purposeful impact he wants in the world. So it doesn't really matter what it is, but once you define that and you're clear on it, only then can you start to design your business well in a way that serves you. So that whole idea of from a problem-solving point of view of starting at that big picture is really powerful. And that's where your strategy comes from. And that's obviously where you start to prioritize. And I guess the next part of it, problem-solving, comes down to how do you solve problems, right? How do you solve those priorities that move the dial forward? Some of them are quite transactional. They are, they're things that you build into your environment that once installed, they generate some sort of stability or return. So I always have a view, or one of the things we teach is that certainty allows us to thrive with uncertainty. So the more certainty in an environment, the more we're able to tolerate risk, the more we're able to tolerate flexibility or changes that come in front of us. So we need to create some degree of stability from time to time. So what types of systems or what structures create that? Versus what creates progress. So what is it that drives towards that destination? So you could put systems in your business, install them, and no one adopts them, and no one's actually focusing on the growth target or the goal. Well, the system doesn't even mean anything. It's not being utilized. So the two kind of balance off against one another. So when we solve that problem, how do we build the ecosystem? And how do we help people realize what type of problem they're solving? That particular piece we could go into a lot of detail about, but that gives you a bit of an idea of where I would normally start.
Okay, no, that's great. And I usually start with an assessment, which is basically what you're talking about. And you really, as a business owner, you need to have an external assessment because you're too close to your business, and you need some perspective around it. It's interesting because I do outsource CFO for some organizations, but maybe 15% of what I do is financial and the numbers. Because the numbers are one thing that you got to get control of, but really you got to fix the things that are going to make the numbers better. Which is what you're talking about. You have to change and manage that change. So what we're going to do is we're going to dig into a little bit about change management. How do you actually facilitate change effectively, especially since most organizations have a lot of trouble doing that? Before we do that, I'm going to show you the video that I was going to show you about our event on next Thursday evening. And then I'll be back talking small business with Brad.
Join us at the Montclair Brewery on Thursday, October 26th for Networking That Works. Meet with like-minded entrepreneurs in a relaxed environment. I'm Andrew Frazier, and I welcome you to our Power Network event and look forward to introducing you to our members. Please use the link below to register.
Okay, welcome back. So Brad, we're talking about really how to change successfully. Earlier you said a little bit about the reasons why businesses fail. And, part of it may be process, part of it may be commitment. And, getting people to embrace the change. So now, if you're talking to me and, we're talking about making some changes within the business, what are and I'm the CEO, what are some of the key things that you need to do to prepare me to prepare the organization for successful change?
Yeah, again, a great question. So first of all, the most important thing to start with is to understand what it looks like to change. And then we can start to think about the systematic approach to change that allows us to be successful. So if you think about change, deliberate change, deliberate progress towards a destination. I'm not talking about a change that's forced on someone. I'm talking about a business deciding to be different. Is that there are two critical dynamics that a CEO or the owner will need to think about. And that is, one is, what is the result of the change that we're chasing, and what does that vision look like? How do we paint that? Now, that painting of that vision from a starting point needs to be rational and emotional. So it needs to have a degree of what I'd call leadership and management in it. Leadership, a generation of motivation and inspiration of our people towards that outcome. And we need to think about the reason people would get up in the morning to do work for us, to go to that destination. Why would they want to do that? What would excite them about it? What would motivate them to move that way? And then finally, the rational result. So the rational result might be financial. It might be a shift in building something different, creating a new dynamic. But if we don't have that clarity on what it looks like from a point of view of an exciting, motivating aspect of that journey to other people, and the rational design and structure of it, very hard place to start, because no one's going to come with us. But the second component of that is, when you start looking at that result, we then just need to take into account what is it that needs to be factored into the design. Now, where a lot of CEOs love to go into is structure, the logic, the things that I can control. So, I want to see something being built or created, or a financial target being hit, or whatever it might be. Now, those structures are great, and they help us think about the environment and what needs to change. But the key thing in this is to respect that people drive that change. So there's a behavior that comes with that. And if we don't take that into account, and we don't think about who we need to be as a leader to get there, and how our people need to behave to efficiently get there, then we're going to have problems. So there's this idea of helping someone understand that we've got to move people from where they are going to be. Who needs to be on this bus? What sort of people are going to thrive? What people are going to add value in this on the bus, on the journey? What do we need to factor in terms of those people and what they bring to the table rationally, i.e., their functional capability, their ability or experience in bringing specific knowledge to the table, etc. But more importantly, what's the behavior we want to see, and what are we wanting from this change? So that behavior, is very much about deciding what sort of culture supports that change in the best way. The two go hand in hand. The culture interlinks to the strategy, right? So we can go to a destination, but if our culture is pulling behind it and saying, yeah, we want to go with you, that's an important destination, then it's all going to happen a lot faster and a lot more efficiently. So that's the first piece. The next piece that I'd really, really try to help understand is that there's what I'd call an adoption of innovation curve. So the same way that our customers go through, if we think about the iPhone, and the adoption of the iPhone went right back when it all started, right? There were people, your friends, that just loved technology, and they were all ahead of the game, and they were on board with it before it was even a product. And of course, over time, this became a very popular piece of technology, the iPhone, and ultimately that style of innovation is now very, very normal. In our environment, we're looking to create that first 20%. So we're looking to get our early adopters, we're looking to get our early majority, right, coming with us on that journey, embedding the change and being successful, so that the rest will come with it. There's almost this tidal effect that you notice. Now, whether that's a really small business, you'll notice it by getting 2 of your 3 people pulling with you, right? If you've got a few staff. If you've got 50 people in your business, it's getting probably a 15 to 20 of them really excited, and at least 2 or 3 of them driving it and excited and really pulling this thing together. So that's just a bit around deliberate change or deliberate progress. There's also lots of dysfunctional change we could talk about, but they're just some foundational principles that we work on.
Okay. No, I mean, definitely, those are key things. And, I think you're sort of alluding to, as a business owner, successful change starts with you. And, if you're not in the equation, then it's most likely going to fail. And there's a few things that you need to do to help make it successfully. One is your behavior. People are going to look to you and how you behave and take their cues from you. So it's not about what you say many times, it's about what you do. Another thing that's key is change. There's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. Mm-hmm. So, you have to have patience so that you can bring people along with you. So you can't just say, today we're doing this and tomorrow we're doing that. It takes a process. And then communication's key. You've got to over communicate. And part of the patience is preparing your people for what's happening. So those are the key things that you had talked about as far as with the business owner. It's almost like you got to prepare yourself, you got to prepare your organization, and then you start to implement. So we talked about preparing yourself. What can you do to prepare your organization for a successful change?
Yeah, great question. So once you've prepared yourself, right, you're going to be clear on what is important to the future of the business. You're going to be thinking about the behavior or the way that you show up in order to bring that to life. And often, what we want to reflect on is what does our organization need to hear, see, or notice differently in order to affect a different way of experiencing the change we want to see. So, I hear this a lot from organizational leaders. Oh, my team, they're great people, but they don't always do what they're supposed to do. They work hard, but they don't focus on the strategic initiatives. They're busy getting things done. Or there's all sorts of situations that play out where our people aren't doing what they need to do. Or the rate of change that we have in our head isn't happening. So what we want to create is a sense of a reset. So an opportunity to sit down and listen to people about the relationship between the vision and where they are, and understand, who it is that is going to come on this journey and who's ready for it and what we would need to do to help them come along that journey. So that idea of listening and learning and understanding our environment is really powerful. Now, why that costs you time, right? And while that costs you a little bit of energy, it allows you to understand your problem more effectively. It allows you to understand what people's relationship is with that change. And so often this part is forgotten. So it's very hard to say, well, what am I going to do to my organization if I don't understand really what's going on? And because we're so, usually as entrepreneurs or business owners, we're so ahead of the game. We're thinking about the next thing. We're thinking about how we, make this thing function. We're dealing with risks all the time. We've got a lot going on in our mind more often than not. And so calmly spending that time, pulling that apart, allows you to say, well, what is it that's getting in the way? Now, the idea of pulling then the team around that and say, well, what are the levers that I need to pull? Now, this is your strategy, but then this is the components or the initiatives in the strategy that are real and tangible and allow people to buy into something that meaningfully shows them progress, right? So what are the initiatives that they can grab onto? Now, those initiatives, you ideally want to have them design them. In a perfect world, it'd be great. It's great when your team designed the way to build the future. You give them a destination, you give them a set of problems, gives them some constraints, you help them think through it, and you get them bought into designing that future for you. And this is where you, first of all, build leadership in your team by showing that they're able to create a sense of destination, design that solution, and help people function within it. Secondly, you build a sense of energy that we're going to somewhere really important and we're going to make some positive change and we're going to get a result here. Thirdly, we have to help our people realize that because we're going into the unknown, we really need to stabilize. So we need to recognize that, hey, some things aren't going to work. We're going to have to continuously learn and improve, because if we're changing, we're doing something different, which means we haven't done it before, which means we haven't succeeded in knowing that it can be done. So we might have some learning and mistakes, but we have to tolerate that and factor that in to our journey. Now, if we can create an environment where the team are aware on that and they're starting off well, focused on the right initiatives, then the key from there is creating that continuous assessment of progress. So a sense of renewal. If we set that up and go, great, they're all good, the team are pretty smart, they're switched on, they know the vision, I'll kind of get back to what I'm doing now, and I'll put that strategy on the table, and we've had this workshop or some sort of starting point. More often than not, people go back to their old ways, right? They'll go back to either being busy, or they'll go back to whatever it is that was maybe holding this change back from organically happening in the first place. So you really want your team to be autonomously pulling towards this future that you have, rather than you dragging them along. So if we've created an environment that started to have a sense of ownership from our people and pushing, towards this future, well, we have to keep that momentum, right? So to gear the organization up is to have frameworks and structures that help us keep moving. So that's a scoreboard, it's a sense of progress. Where are we at, right? Where are we at versus where we want to be? What's been installed? What's been introduced? How have we hit our targets? Have we not? What have we learned from that? How do we keep this cycle of continuous improvement and continuous momentum towards that future? And what a lot of good leaders are great at, but sometimes unfortunately get in the way of, is we might have this great result and you get really excited about the result because you're going, right, that's the vision, that's where I want us going. But our team are working really hard on trying to make that happening, and they're going, wow, my God, that mountain looks really big, right? I'm concerned about that mountain. So we need to continuously acknowledge progress, right? Our vision won't be achieved often, if it's a genuine vision or if there's a genuine sense of progress that's meaningful. It usually isn't done in 2 days, right? It's very rare. If it's that easy, we'll go and pay someone to go and get it done, and it will all be done. But if we're talking about sincere, sustainable, improvement and step changing of your business, then you've got to realize that that's a case of continuous progress. And so we have to keep acknowledging the behavior we want to see and the progress that's going in the right direction, and be very clear on the behavior that we don't want to see and call that out, right? And be very clear on that as we move forward. Because what happens is, if we allow what I'd call insidious behavior, right? This behavior that pulls away from the vision to be okay. For example, not hitting milestones, right? Not working together to solve problems, not being excited about the future, and having a sense of pessimism or negativity in it. If these things show up in your culture, right, the fastest way to pull it apart is to let it happen, right? So it's allowing these healthy conversations about good behavior, being okay that there's a way that we would expect people to operate in the process of change. There's things we want to avoid, and while we might see things, people, I'd call it in my world, going below the line, we might notice people blaming or providing excuses or denying that there's a problem. That's okay. We'll see that happen, pull them back up to taking responsibility and accountability for it. So these are fundamentals to getting things moving, in my experience.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, definitely, preparing the organization takes many faces, but you have to change the culture along with the change that you're trying to make. And one of the key things I always look at is, okay, now that the CEO has the change and is bought into it, now he's got to get the direct reports to buy into it, and all of them, before you start moving forward too fast. I think that you mentioned CEOs like to move quickly, but if you skip that step, then you own the results. But you need to make your managers own the results. But if you don't incorporate them in and get their buy-in and make sure everybody's on the same page, then instead of it being their initiative, it's, oh, well, this is what he wants to do. And, if you don't have that level of support, then it's hard to do it successfully. In my book, Running Your Small Business Like a Pro, one of the chapters is it me or are my employees crazy? Because, every business owner is like, what's wrong with my employees? But one of the things I always say is, if there's something wrong, it's your fault, because you're the one who has the power to make it any way you want. So if it's not the way you want it, you need to look in the mirror and figure out what you're doing and how to do it. So I think that definitely that's key. So we're coming up close to 9, but I wanted to make sure, we talked about preparing yourself as the owner, preparing your organization. Now, implementation. So, just real quick, what are some of the things that are key to implement successfully once you've prepared yourself and prepared your organization for the change?
Again, good question. So implementation is an interesting consideration, because what we're starting to think about now is the way a solution is adopted, the way a solution is installed and then adopted, right? And I'm going to provide a little bit of theory around this, because I think some of your listeners might appreciate this. 2 types of problems. There's a framework called Cynefin, and I'd encourage people to have a look at Cynefin, Cynefin, Cynefin. It's a Welsh term. And what it helps us do is think about the way we solve a problem in the context that we're operating in. So on one side, there's what we'd call predictable solutions, right? So if we're solving a problem and the outcome is predictable, then it's either what we call a simple problem or a complicated problem. Simple, cause and effect. If I do one step, I'll get the next step will be the outcome. Or we do a series of things and we know we're going to get that outcome. Or a complicated means there's different ways to get there, but we know that the outcome is very achievable and it's predictable. It can be predicted. On the other side, there's what we call complex problems. Now, complex problems are where the outcome is unpredictable. There's a probability, right? We want to make the best decisions in the moment. Say, I think based on this that we're going to maximize the likelihood of it succeeding, but we have to respect that it's definitely not predictable, right? Now, if you think about the changes and the implementations that you go on, I'll give you a basic example. You might decide that you need to introduce a system into your business, a CRM or a tool or a structure. Now, that idea of implementing the tool as a structure in your business that helps people function is quite predictable. It's been done 100 times before. You can follow a process, you can get it installed, you can get things mapped into it. You might have good ways to do it, you might have better ways to do it, but that can happen. But no one's paying in your business to, and the performance of your business isn't about how well it installs the CRM. It's how well it uses the CRM to get outcomes. Now, what the outcomes are not as predictable. How do we leverage the CRM data to make better decisions? How do we start to engage with the marketplace appropriately? How do we prioritize what's important in the market to sell appropriately? All these things are more complex in nature. So what we want to help our team get very good at from an implementation point of view is determining the projects or the solutions that provide stability and usually are quite predictable, that can get installed and can be done by a deadline, it can be done on time, but also then mapping in over the top of that, well, where is the complexity and where do I have to monitor consistently towards this bigger vision that isn't a cause and effect, right? It's always fraught with danger. Now, what you usually find is anything that has a human being in it has a level of complexity, because people don't always have the ability to make judgments the way we'd like them to. They might fail in certain areas of change. We might find our customers, we might have a fairly good belief system that there's a product market fit, but we don't necessarily know exactly what the adoption rate is going to be. So we have to continuously monitor and manage and adjust our strategy on just the way we do things to continuously get towards it. Now, the more that our business understands that, the more the implementation of that change succeeds. The more they believe in cause and effect, the more there's a sense of anxiety and frustration when things don't go right. So it really helps us to understand the nature of problem solving and the way we design these solutions, and then obviously provide an environment where we're monitoring and managing the right stuff. Our people can actually do a lot of great things in gray areas if we give them something to lean on. So the structures that help them realize that they're making great progress in spite of this complex changing environment. So if you think about your salespeople, or if any of you do sales, right? When you're selling, if you consistently do certain things, you're maximizing the chance of getting sales come through. Now, you might one month be 15% ahead of budget. Next month, you might be 5% ahead. The next month, you might be 5% below, right? The idea of some consistency of what lead indicators drive that, what things you can do to drive that outcome is important. And adjusting and looking at and optimizing this continuously is important, because the marketplace might change, or the certain types of customers that are coming in might be slightly more challenging at times than others, right? So it's this idea of monitoring, managing, adjusting, and pivoting towards that vision. The more we get comfortable of staying in that zone, the easier it is, right? And I think most good CEOs tend to be pretty good at it. They stay calm in it, they respect it, they understand this, but sometimes our people aren't as good at it, and they can find a level of anxiety in it, which we need to help them manage by having that structure and that idea of consistent monitoring. So Andrew, there's some basic sort of theories. Of course, everyone's got a different specific thing they're implementing. So, I prefer to provide it with a little bit of framework and structure.
Okay, no, that was excellent. I think that, you talked about measurement, you talked about feedback, encouragement. So, those are all key things. And, also people are different. And, understanding that, you can deal with tasks efficiently and get them done quickly, but you got to deal with people effectively. And sometimes to do it effectively, it may take longer, and everyone's different. So you can't always treat everybody the same. So that's cool. So we're coming up on the hour. And what I want to do is really condense what we talked about into 3 key things that people can start to think about and implement starting tomorrow. So take a minute to think about that. I'll play a quick video about the Small Business Pro Network that we launched this year, and then we'll be back talking small business with Brad Eisenhuth.
Your business can only go as far as you're prepared to lead it. You need access to expert advice, important connections, and valuable resources to achieve your goals. What can we do to help? I created the Small Business Pro Network to help you to grow your business smarter, faster, and easier by meeting you where you are along your journey from startup to scaling. We will help you to accelerate your growth, maximize your profitability, and create a sustainable business that can run successfully without you. But how do we do this? As a member of the Small Business Pro Network, you'll have access to private, in-person, and online networking activities to build valuable relationships with important connections, expert advice and curated content to help you gain the knowledge you need to grow revenue and increase profit, and our proven proprietary Masterpreneur playbook and weekly action plans will guide you along the critical path for creating a sustainable business that can run without you. Where can you get all of this for less than $1 a day? Only at the Small Business Pro Network, www.sbpronetwork.com.
I'm looking forward to seeing you there.
Your business can only...
All right, welcome back to Leadership Live at 8:05. I'm talking small business here with Brad Eisenhuth. We had a very lively discussion about really how to, manage change within your organization successfully, and which is, as a CEO, that's your job. And we covered a lot of stuff, but what are 3 things people should take away and really can start focusing on tomorrow to help them be a better leader within their organization?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Look, 3 really simple ideas, but really important. So first is invest in yourself, get people around your blind spots, get clear on get them helping you define the problem, the future, right? Get around that particular investment and see it as an investment to have people around you to do that. The second thing would be really practical about understanding the rate of return and probability of success of a solution, right? So think about where you actually want to be, and then chunk it out into the solutions that are actually going to drive you towards it, not the things that feel good, right? Sometimes the things that feel nice, but there are actually solutions that are going to drive you forward. And then the final thing for me is investing in the idea that it is a journey, right? Consistently compounding attention to building the things that get you there. Be really clear that, there will be shifts in kind of momentum. There will need to be things that you don't anticipate that need to be built into that deliberate change. So factor that in. Know that you're going to be on a journey of improvement and be okay with that. Just embrace it for what it is, because the result and the process of getting there is going to be fun. But more importantly, you'll get the results you want if you put the time into it.
No, those are great. So really invest in yourself. So prepare yourself and prepare your people for the change. Be practical. You want to make sure that what you're trying to do is achievable. And one thing I always like to mention is see it before you do it. Sometimes you're like, we want this to happen, but if you haven't seen the process of how it's going to happen, it might not be achievable. It might take a lot more than you think it's going to take. So taking the time out to see it before you do it is key. And then just, it's a journey. You don't know exactly how it's going to go. You don't know where you're going to end up, but, consistency is key to being able to traverse it successfully. So this has been great, Brad. I appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me this evening. Anything else you want to share before we get ready to close out?
No, Andrew, I think it was fun. I enjoyed it. At the end of the day, all I ask is that, the people listening to this, see this as an investment in yourself. I hope you enjoy it. And more importantly, all these challenges in business, they're just opportunities for us to keep growing. So I really hope you can see your business as not a threat, but an opportunity. And for me, that was one of the best things that I looked at, and when I went through a bit of a challenge. So, enjoy it, and all the best to everyone in the audience.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. Just hang out for a minute, and as I close out, and we'll chat afterwards. Cool.
Thanks.
Okay, so no, definitely another great show. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you for your comments and feedback. Definitely much appreciated, and glad to see that this was valuable for you, because really that's who we do it for. So thanks again for tuning in. Each week we have a great guest, a great show. Just a preview for next week. What we've got is we've got Gene Bahinsky. He's visited us on a few times, but what we're going to talk about is really getting more done faster, cheaper, and easier. There's a lot of tools and practices available now that can really help you as a small business or a solopreneur be so much more effective. Increasing your output, increasing the impact of what you're doing. So we're going to talk about that. He does that for many organizations in different ways. So looking forward to that next week as well. And really at the end of the day, the more that you know, the faster and more successfully your business is going to grow.
Thank you for listening to Leadership Live at 8:05, Talking Small Business. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Leadership Live is one of the many valuable resources provided through the Small Business Pro University, empowering business owners to learn, profit, and grow. Find out more at sbpro.u.com.